Hello, and welcome to the lesson on Kaffir Boy by Mark Mathabane. Now, Kaffir Boy is about Mathabane's experiences growing up in South Africa in the 1960s and 1970s under a system called apartheid. Apartheid, if you haven't heard of it, is kind of like segregation in the United States, only pretty much worse. It was total separateness between black and white people in South Africa, and it had a whole bunch of laws that went with it that were purposefully there to keep black people down and to keep them in poverty and facing discrimination. Now, luckily for Mathabane, he took his education seriously and then he got a tennis scholarship to a college in America. And now he lives in the United States and he did quite well for himself despite having a lot of challenges when he was young. Now, South Africa is the context for Mathabane's story. On the left, you see a map. All the colored sections of the map were called homelands, places where different African tribes were supposed to live. After South Africa got its independence from Great Britain around 1910, the white people who had been living there for quite some time because of colonization didn't really want to share power with all the black Africans. And if you see on the right, that chart shows you just how many more black people lived in South Africa than white. So white people felt that if they didn't make these laws to protect their own wealth and their own status, they were afraid of losing it. So a lot of racist laws were put in place to keep white people in power to protect what they had. Now, the genre of Kaffir Boy is nonfiction, and it's specifically an autobiography. So nonfiction stories deal with real people and real events, and they're written by an author about his or her own life. Now, remember, it's not absolute fact. A lot of the things that the author talks about are from his memory. So the dialogue is not necessarily exact, but it is his perspective and his first person subjective point of view colored by his own emotions and perceptions that give us the story called Kaffir Boy. Just like in fiction, you're going to look for things like theme, meaning the meaning of the story, the plot, the characterization, the setting is highly influential, and the point of view of the character who's writing. In this case, it was the author, Mark Mathabane. And specifically ask yourself, why did the author focus on the incidents he did? What's his purpose in writing his tale? Does he just want to write about himself, or is he trying to convey a bigger message to his readers? There's two kinds of characterization. There's direct and indirect. Direct is very clear when the author tells you about a certain character, like specifically, this is how the character is, this is his personality. Indirect is actually more common, I feel. It's subtle. It's when the audience has to deduce for themselves the characteristics of the character by observing his or her thought process, behavior, speech, way of talking, appearance, and manner of communication with other characters, as well as by discerning the response of other characters. So all the little things that we learn about a character that put together help you get to know them better. So here's an example. So on the left, we've got a piece of the story. Mathabane writes, a short, chubby black woman came along from the opposite direction. She had a scuttle overflowing with coal on her cloth-covered head. An infant, bawling deafeningly, was loosely swathed with a piece of sheepskin onto her back. Following closely behind the woman and picking up pieces of coal as they fell from the scuttle and placing them in a small plastic bag was a half-naked, pot-bellied, and thumb-sucking boy of about 4. Now, all of this is just narration describing the woman and the boy and her baby. And even though nothing says exactly what she's like, we can infer a lot from this section. We can infer that she's poor, she has a baby and a 4-year-old that are both not dressed extremely well. She's carrying coal, and the little 4-year-old is picking up the pieces, so every little piece counts. Pot-bellied, that means malnourished, so none of them probably have enough to eat. So it's a pretty tragic and sad scene, and we can tell a lot through indirect characterization about these people in the story. And then theme, on the right-hand side, we've got something from the end of the story where the author writes, that night, at 7.5 years of my life, the battle lines of my family were drawn. I chose to fight on my mother's side, and thus my destiny was forever altered. So the theme of the story has to do with fighting for things you believe in or things you want. So when you're reading the story, try to figure out who's doing the fighting, what are they fighting for, are they fighting for the same things or for different things, and why does it all matter? You know, what is the author trying to teach us about fighting for what you want and fighting for what you believe in? And does he escape his circumstances in the end? In this story, this is just about his early life, so it's about him going to school. But I will tell you, just like earlier, he does escape his circumstances in the end through a combination of education and tennis talent, and he ends up in the United States. Also, we're going to do a little vocabulary analogies as part of the reading guide for this excerpt. So on your left, you see some common types of analogies. Analogies are just word relationships. So if you skim over that left-hand chart, you can see the different kind of relationships that words might have. So synonyms, antonyms, part to whole, etc. Now on the right, here's an example. Rural is to soil as urban is to what? Well, soil is on the ground. Rural means farmland, so soil is on the ground in a farmland. What tends to be on the ground in an urban city like New York City? Probably pavement. So you'll see some of those at the end. If you have any questions about those, ask me. And I hope you enjoy your reading.